Welcome to today's episode of TheSquare. We're having a curious conversation with Lara, Lesmes, and Fredrik Hellberg. You guys are the founders and directors of Space Popular. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Here.
great to be here.
I have so many different questions that I kind of want to jump in with, and looking at just the broad base of work and the creativity. But before we get into that, I have to know a little bit more about your why. So, Lara, why don't you tell us, like, what is it about being a designer and what you do that is fulfilling versus any other job out there?
I guess it kind of just happens, and you cannot imagine any other way of going about your life. We both started through teaching, and I must say that was just really interesting from the point of view of like having to communicate and work with others. And I think from then on to running a studio, it sort of felt quite a natural transition. Now we do both things in parallel. But yeah, having the possibility of pursuing the research on the things that interest us, and even with all the difficulties running our own studio, is incredible.
Why Space Popular? Where did that name come from?
Then the name came from, I think, the word popular, I guess, kind of came first. Like it took us, like a lot of designers, people that have the names their own work.
Right.
Took us 2 years, I think, to arrive at not to say that this name is so great, but I think it started with the idea of thinking about what's the most important part of the work. And the word popular obviously carries a lot of strange connotations and stuff, but kind of people-centered work and centered around what people enjoy or what people like. And to have that in the name, we thought would kind of focus the attention on not necessarily try to not be elitistic or not be kind of unnecessarily fancy, but like imagining just if you think about creative work and like what is popular, what do people actually like?
Yeah,
that's somehow the space we want to be in. But it actually, like, I think Lara arrived first at the acronym SPOP, which we try to use as much as we can, because you can apply it to anything. Should we spop it or versus spoppy or?
I love that. I noticed from your website and some of the research I did there. A lot of people have a vein of design that they kind of stay in, and it's almost like you intentionally don't have a vein of design. I mean, you have done everything from interiors and architecture to furniture to installations and activations, as well as the virtual space. What is the core foundation of all these different expressions of design?
Yeah, I guess it's not a very wise business path that we have chosen. We like doing everything and not specializing. But I guess we can't help it. But at the core, and I mean, we do quite a fair bit of reflecting on our own work when we get to lecture and also writing and so on. And at the core, we always consider that there is sort of two aspects. One is experience-centered design, that like basically you are designing from the human point of view, and also from the point of view of the mind, like what things will mean to somebody and how they will be read or interpreted. That is at the core of like when we are designing a spa in Thailand or when we are designing a virtual space, we are applying the same criteria. And then in terms of how things are made, and then also this applies to physical and virtual things, to develop or to resolve design in system-based thinking, that you resolve something that doesn't work just for that project, but you resolve it at a sort of almost like universal system kind of level. I would say that that's what most of our work really has in common across the board.
Yeah, and also the the sort of urge for the work itself, like the actual doing the work, is at least half or ideally more of the pleasure of the work. That like it's the pleasure is not then the reward you get once the work is done, but it's actually the actual process of doing it. And I think we've then quite intuitively sort of either pushed for certain kinds of projects or worked in certain kinds of way where the work itself has been stimulated, because somehow it's like, it's obviously not as direct as like a chef or a musician or something like that, where like you do it in real time. As a designer, you don't almost do anything in real time. Like you compress a month or a year or 5 years in some cases into a thing that you can go into or that you can touch or something. But somehow it remains like the way that, if a musician didn't enjoy playing it, you can hear it. And somehow there's something there too for a designer or an architect. And we've tried to then, just do work that is actually fun to do. Having said that, as Lara said, it doesn't mean that it ends up being clever for like actually building a company. But we have been extremely willing to compromise that goal for the goal of having good time doing it and feeling a true sense of personal purpose with the work.
Well, and that's definitely reflected in the work that you've done, because the work that you've done is beautiful, and I don't think you can look at some of the pieces and some of the projects that you've worked on and not see immediately your passion for the work come out. How often are you going into a project with an idea already, or a dimly seeing in the mirror, if you will, of what it's going to be like at the end? And how often is it just simply a journey, and when you get there, you realize you've gotten there?
It's always the second. We never really know where we're getting ourselves into. It's impossible, no? I mean, how could you know what it's going to be that quickly? Very often you need to figure out the formats of a project. So that's the thing that we have been facing a lot lately, and that you're gonna get a commission for an artwork, and maybe quite early on you need to figure out like really how it's gonna be formatted, so you can check visibility, budget, and so on quite early on. And we have learned to be able to separate that, right? Like, how is something going to be constructed? How can we cost it, and so on? And then what is all the research we want to do, and how do we want to do that, and where will that lead us? So almost separating format from content has been very helpful, because you cannot have 100% uncertainty, because then you would need to self-commission all projects.
For sure.
It's very hard to get commissions for like whatever will be. But I think otherwise we have learned to be comfortable with the uncertainty of what a project will end up being, and be patient with that process.
So what is that process? Because it's incredible to hear you say patience, because I think patience gets overlooked so often in the creative process. Patience is often the last thing people want, whether you're on the client or the artist side. What does your inspiration process look like? How do you get inspired? How do you follow through in a project to get to an end work?
Yeah, I think at least some of that probably comes from having studied architecture. I mean, like, architects quite often have, out of necessity, an enormous amount of patience.
Mm-hmm.
Due to the fact, many other professions too, obviously, where it takes a long time to realize something. And with the actual work itself day to day can be extremely tedious, and it's difficult to see how the thing you did this month fits in with what it's actually eventually going to be. And I think that also reflects in the way that architects talk to each other, the way they listen to each other. And like, the most boring thing in the world can be an architecture lecture, and you have hundreds of people sitting listening with with an incredible amount of patience. So I think probably that kind of connected with the longevity of, or sort of the length and the span that designers generally, but again, coming back to just thinking about the way an architect might have to think, that a lot of the inspiration often comes from thinking quite far and wide, like where a lot of the research projects that we have been working on that are kind of semi-self-initiated or comes from commissions from museums or galleries that deals with research looking at the future of spatial experience, looking like 50 years into the future, where actually a lot of the inspiration comes from imagining being there if we live that long, and seeing how the work we're doing now either has relevance or influence, or not even that, but just kind of thinking about these much longer time frames actually is really inspirational for even the day-to-day work that might be might not always be super fun all the time.
Yeah. What's the collaboration like? How does that work between the two of you?
Yes, I think that when you work with someone who's also a part of your life, even more than a coworker would be, you find other ways to communicate, which is both good. Like I think we have a working method, as when you hear stories of Charles and Ray Eames or other like life and professional collaborators that found ways to exchange ideas that go beyond the usual kind of communication methods. It's both good and bad, because in the end, the communication can be extremely fluent and you can like exchange ideas in ways that you can't with other people. But it also means that like the communication with people outside of that little partnership, that by necessity needs to find another language.
Right.
And that's something that we're still learning. And as you mentioned, is complimenting us, which we really appreciate, on the range of projects that we've been doing. A lot of them are getting bigger and bigger, especially the ones that are sort of artworks or driven more as kind of working with collaborators from galleries and museums, solo commissions where collaborations go to musicians or people in film, performers. This kind of collaboration communication systems, kind of are evolving, which is actually really exciting.
Are there projects that stand out? And I realize I'm a little bit asking you to pick a favorite child here. But are there projects that stand out to you, either because of the inspiration process or what it means to the community around it, or it allowed you to try a different technique? Are there projects that stand out to you as, I won't use the word favorites, but let's call them milestone projects for you?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I love some of the competition work that we did, even though those were unrealized. But I guess, it was a big moment was building our first building, which was here in Spain, in Valencia. And that was, we loved that one because of the whole process itself, especially the construction process.
That was the brick vault house?
Yes, thank you. And we worked with the craftsmen, and we established very long-lasting relationships with craftsmen with whom we continued to do research and like potentially some projects on the pipeline on that regard. That has been very fulfilling. And I guess then as well, a virtual project, Arquia, for Fundación Arquia here in Spain as well, was very fulfilling in the sense of, it was this virtual conference space in 2020. And it was incredibly fulfilling to be able to deliver something like that at that specific time. And something that, no one would have.
It opened during the pandemic, and that's why they did it through a virtual platform.
Mm.
And it was the very early days of like joining in as avatars for people who maybe was joining from a phone or from a personal computer, not a gaming computer or anything like that. And making that possible, and the moment when we were testing out how many people could actually join that space without it crashing was one of these rush moments. I was like, oh my God, it's happening. Then it's like, look how many people, the sound is a disaster because computer can't pass it. But this is incredible. We're all here.
It's truly a feeling you can't appreciate until you've been put in that position. I 100% agree with you. Fredrik, how about for you?
Yeah, I completely agree. It was very special to us, those projects. Actually, maybe one project that we keep coming back to is the first project we ever did when we were, in our 20s, and we were thinking about, what kind of work do we want to do? And we did a speculative project, which was a competition for kind of an ideas competition, but we designed this kind of virtual platform, but it was before virtual platforms was there were websites obviously, but like this kind of idea of a 3-dimensional space that you can enter beyond gaming was something that we didn't know how to do, but we did a project called the Cloud Resilience, which is 2012 or something, which was, it kind of links a lot to the interest that we've had then for the whole running of our studio. And this project was, it was at the same time as, it was a database for global mortality rates. So it was, the project was about kind of figuring out a new way of interacting with people that have passed away. So we created a database which created this kind of spatial diagram where each deceased person, no matter how they passed away, would be a single node. So it was a diagram and also a place where like you could virtually attend a memorial service or funeral. And we just produced a very short film to describe this idea. And somehow we come back to it again and again and again. It's kind of interesting that it's the first project we did.
I think that you set a high bar for yourself right out of the gate. I did want to ask you, because when I was looking through some of the photography from the brick vault house, light played an obvious role, a very prominent role, it seems like, in that design. What was your thought process for that?
Well, it was after we figured out what the construction system would be, and like, yes, we are going to work with brick vaults, and because of the times of that, it's relatively slow. We were not going to have a huge team, and it's a very handmade process. So it was going to be slow. Then combine that with something that was incredibly fast. That was this very slim metal structure that was put together in like 3 days or something like that. And then once that was figured out, then it all came down to really solving the puzzle of how much could be built in the plot. It's really maxed out. The client really wanted that to fit as much as possible in it. And then that together with how can we, in that climate, open up as much as possible while having most windows covered from the sun in summer, while trying to have lighting through the winter. So it was very much a geometric puzzle, and it works beautifully like that, because in most sides of the house it's mostly facing south, which I always think it's crazy in such a climate. But because all the windows are covered, and in the summer you have more vertical sun, it's working really well in terms of climate. So that is what I think creates really nice lighting. Also the fact that you have some covered areas that are paved with kind of almost quite bright floor.
Yeah.
Then even though you have a lot of covering, you're still reflecting in a lot of light.
Yeah.
But all the light is very diffuse. And then you have the warmth of the bolts. So it was a really nice process to realize that, like, you can, from literally the construction method itself, you can derive so many other properties.
Well, and when you read, when you hear the project is the brick vault house, you think brick and heavy and vault, you don't think light and airy, which is exactly what the design ended up being, which I loved about that.
So now I want to make brick vault structures that are sitting on cardboard.
Yeah.
maybe the next challenge, like literally structural cardboard. So
Yeah, that's the sort of
that happens.
dream project. I mean, these brick vaults. I mean, most people don't really know the backstory. It's really, really interesting, actually. It's this technique of kind of interlocking brick vault systems actually comes from this part of Spain, and it was really kind of mastered by this guy Rafael Guastavino.
Well mastered. He was the clever guy who took it to the US and patented it.
Oh, there you
He
go.
was from
Okay,
from
fair enough.
part of Spain, and he went to the US, and actually most of the sort of, or a lot, hundreds of them, like train stations, civic buildings,
Boston City Library.
all around the US, especially on the east side, are built by the Spanish architect who worked with this very specific brick vault laying technique. And the very unique thing is that you can make it extremely thin. Like usually when you think of a brick vault that's load bearing, you think be really big and thick.
Right.
This is extremely thin, and it doesn't require any scaffolding as you're building it, which is, we were really, really keen on the fact that you could build something like that where, and normally if you do either a concrete construction or a brick construction,
Right.
you need to build a building before to build a building on.
Yeah.
Work. And in this case, the actual building itself was the formwork.
Yeah.
And which is it's so exciting to think.
What was the scaffolding more than the... And these vaults are 6 centimeters thick, so they are very light.
But,
You can helicopter them in fact. Has been done in Cuba.
yeah.
Very interesting experiments.
We could do a whole nother conversation on that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess I'm curious, again, with the broad base of projects that you've done, is there one that you haven't done that you are super keen to do?
Oh, that's interesting. I think maybe there are two main things that we're really, like, bigger projects that we're really keen on doing. And with our work with virtual spaces and virtual architecture, we've done a lot of research and writing and work with universities on the question of civic spaces or public spaces that are virtual. And we're not alone in this. There's a lot of groups and organizations that are working towards thinking about what does it mean to have a public space in a virtual environment. And I guess they kind of, to be either involved or in some way in the sort of building of virtual urbanism in the more public sense of the word is like really a project that it will happen in some way or another. And we're just kind of dying to be involved. Basically, like, at the moment, the virtual environment, or the immersive internet, as we choose to call it, most people call it the metaverse. We choose not to call it that. But it's essentially like a densely packed shopping mall with no public space in between. And the moment when they start to be pushed apart and there's public space in between, we really hope that we can be there to help design some of that. Like, they won't look like sidewalks, but maybe they will function like sidewalks. And what would they look like? And that's like really exciting for us to imagine being a part of that.
I love that.
And so I mentioned too, the other thing is we're in the process of like reorganizing the way we work and stuff. So building our own studio, a new studio, where a lot of the VR work we're doing and prototyping can happen in-house. That's both in life and in practice, something we're really excited about.
I'm curious, just because it's been such a prominent topic in the headlines lately. How have you seen, when it comes to generative AI, and of course there's there's things like Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and ChatGPT and some of the big names out there, but we've been doing a lot of kind of digging on our side of how we can take the idea of generative AI and use it as a tool, which is the way I feel like it should be used. It's, it's something that's just like any other tool out there. It's an incredible tool, but it's a tool and it needs a person to wield it. We've been finding really interesting ways of not just helping with workflow and process, but actually helping us with our creativity and being something that we can iterate, design. How have you been, have you been investigating in that? How have you been looking at using it?
Yes, we actually started talking about this a bit in an artwork, an exhibition that opened in the auspicious date of February 2020. It was open for 3 weeks. That project that we worked on for a couple of years, well, we showed it in many other ways. It's called Freestyle, where we were looking at the impact that developments in media, especially in distribution media, kind of specifically, had in the development of architectural styles. And looking at that timeline, it becomes quite clear. We also extracted some specific moments and stories that really told that relationship in very interesting ways. And in that project, we were already bringing up this the potential impact of technologies such as artificial intelligence. At that time, we were, in order to make it more relatable and understandable, we were talking specifically about Pinterest, which many architects hate.
Many honey-do lists hate too. I'm just going to throw that out there.
I don't know. I guess like clients and Pinterest boards and that people think is very annoying. However, I think that is so interesting because it allows you to communicate something without having to put it into words.
Yeah, visually, for sure.
You don't need to know what a style is called. You don't need to describe it into words, but you can define it with an array of images, and then it's like you get it. Yeah. Hopefully, both get it. So I have found it quite surprising that the way that AI applications that output images have the basis on text. I mean, now we have there is different methods, but it seems like the ones that have been used the most are text to image. And that was very surprising, this to me. I never thought it would go that way. I really thought it would go the image to image.
Yeah, because that's what we were so excited about. Like why we, in this research project, we parallel the printing press with Pinterest. Yeah. Like, it's just one of many tools, and it's a company, whatever, but what it represents, we think, is so interesting. And we speak about this idea of architecture at the speed of the spoken word, which is essentially something we thought we would reach by 2040 or something, probably much earlier now by the speed of which AI is evolving, but basically a moment when you can be inside of a fully believable virtual environment that's 3D, and you can speak or you can select what you want it to be like, and it changes in real time as basically the speed of your thoughts, essentially. And it's something that God knows what it will be like when we get there. But we do work with it like most creative people on a daily basis and try and integrate it into the way we work. But and we use also the new features of ChatGPT and others to do research. We've been doing a lot of big research project where for basic things, we will just ask it, like, did this appear in this book? Where was it mentioned? How many times? Can you find any other examples, etc.? I mean, it's an incredible tool. Yeah. It means that also we realized, we did a project a couple of years ago called Value in the Virtual, when we speak about and investigate, it's like, how do you value virtual things? Because they're made in such different ways. And when we still teach, and when students bring in images that are generated through AI, you realize that not because you dislike the process, because I really don't mind, but you realize that your value system is completely different. It's not more valuable than a stock image. Like if someone brings in a stock image, their own creative work, it's like, no, that's not why we're here. And stock images are great, especially if the process of finding them is really efficient, but it's not parallel to creative work somehow.
How are you using it? You were saying that you're...
It's so funny to hear you say that, because we almost think we actually have had Pinterest boards that are associated with projects, because it's a easier way to get to a mood board, to show to a client. And so one of the primary ways, there's a lot of ways we're using it on the back end for scripting and for some things that just make our tools more efficient. But on the creative side, we've been using it to create images to help that communication, because I could not agree with you more, Lara, that if a client isn't going to understand it in visuals, having written it out would not make any difference. And so having the visuals, and even more so for us, as I'm sure for you it is, it's getting what they don't like about the images is just as important about what they do like. And so we'll use Midjourney or Stable Diffusion to create images that go along with what our style or vision is for a project, and then get their reactions to it, so that we're able to kind of, when we arrive at the end of the project, it's there's no surprises. And in fact, to what you were saying, Fredrik, the iterative process of creating those images, there's a space there for inspiration where the computer doesn't know. The computer only knows what I've told it to do. And there's an interpretation there that happens, that they'll send things back that I wasn't thinking, but I was like, oh, well, maybe that starts a new rabbit trail that brings about a whole nother aspect of the project. So it's been a lot of fun I have not lost time like I have with generative AI, where all of a sudden 2 hours later I went to get one image and I've gotten a whole nother idea that has come out of it. So but it's been an incredible tool, and I'm excited too to see, because I know that we are just scratching the surface. There are going to be people much smarter than me that come up with really unthinkable ideas at the current state that'll be a super easy stretch for them.
Yes, to that, and the different. I mean, because what I find exciting is to see the different tools that are being developed. So what will be the potential input that we will be able to give? I mean, like following that logic, like, okay, well, now an AI that creates PowerPoints, and now one that does blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Now what the prompt is what I find really interesting. I never expected that it would begin with text.
Yeah.
That would be the first thing. Now it seems to be making a lot of sense, and I think it has become a very beautiful process where it's like almost like you have to be a writer or a poet to like and crafting those sentences.
Totally.
My God. But then, like, what would be the other means of input? This kind of has like really opened my mind to like possibilities for communicating ideas, and the moment that we can feed 3D models, and how will we be, in which form, like what is the reading that it will make of that? I think that's fascinating.
Well, there's a whole, I totally agree, and it's been interesting because we did a presentation not too long ago on generative AI, and just as popular, we remade profile pictures for all the people that were in the presentation, and just as popular as the profile picture, we made the creative choice to put the prompt underneath it, and we got just as many comments about the way the prompt was crafted as we did the actual image, because there's an art to it, and the way the computer weighs the different elements that you're giving it is really interesting. So I'm excited to see how that goes. It feels like the next frontier might be extraterrestrial spaces. Do you have any interest in doing things off-world?
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, I think we have thought about it, because in May of this year, in a month, we're going to be in a panel with an astronaut speaking about space design, like an Italian man who has been to the International Space Station.
Oh, that's awesome.
Speaking about this, and we have not done any work along those lines, but I think what's so interesting with thinking about designing for non-Earth inhabitation is that it kind of coincides with the ability to inhabit a space remotely, and I think that's the way we're coming at it, and that's what we're preparing, this kind of way to think or to talk to an actual astronaut, like someone who's actually been to space, about the question of human experience, and why is it so important that we bring our bodies there if we can bring everything else apart from the body to a place? Because we do a lot of work with, what does it mean to inhabit an avatar? How much can you inhabit an avatar? Do a lot of research, and we, like the work that Jeremy Beals has done at Stanford, talking about what he calls homuncular flexibility, the fact that the human body can so easily accept other limbs than the ones we have, like a tail or a third arm, and thinking about all the possibilities of doing that. Clearly, it seems right now like the trajectory is to bring bodies to space, and not the minds, the senses, the other things.
In space to us. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that that's something that we're really interesting, because it's pretty obvious that, you know, we're not going to stop trying to go to space.
For sure.
We're not going to stop trying to transcend and bring our senses beyond the bodies as we have. You know, like all the research we've been doing on media history, that's really so much technology is about, you know, extending the senses. So like, I think that's the way we're coming at it.
I love that.
It would be interesting, yeah.
The thing is while there are definitely, you know, different needs and different external, you know, circumstances for the design, the simple fact of the matter is it's still, like you said, it's a human experience. Like there still needs to be that expression of design, and you're human whether you're here on Earth or in space, and there's a greater opportunity to do different things there, but there's still got to be that common human and shared experience.
Yeah, no, I think it would be a massive thing also to anthropomorphize objects that we put in space. The fact that like the rover has a name and we imagine its limbs as I feel like the only reason why people today are interested in what happens with these things, that you can imagine it as a little body of some kind of mind or consciousness. And I think that's maybe where it will probably seem unnatural, but I think we'll start to really, really do that a lot with the things we send into space, so that we can keep our bodies on Earth, which I think is the only sensible thing to do.
Yeah.
That you can have like a pet in space.
Well, I mean, like, you know,
just like something that you care for in space. Yeah.
Actually send robots with human shapes into space that will have names, and we can see what they do, and we will feel and that the purpose of going to space will be more connected with the necessity of imagining what it's like to experience it. If we can kind of overlay our own experiences onto human body.
Well, I love it. I'm so thankful for the conversation and just getting to know y'all. I'm hopeful. Maybe when I get out to Spain this summer, I'll see if I can't find a way to get over to y'all's offices and we'll go grab some coffee or something. But thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll have links below for all of the ways to experience Space Popular, as well as connect with Lara and Fredrik. And make sure to check us out next time.
Corgan.